All right. Well, this is the stage of the stories tonight. So this is the Kimberley region. So it's part of the Australian monsoonal tropics, or the AMT for the people in the biz, which includes the Kimberley, the top end, and a bit of Cape York in the wet tropics as well. Although the Kimberley and the top end are most similar, because when you get over to Cape York, you've got all those eastern dividing range species mixing in with that. So most of the Australian monsoonal tropics to me is top end and Kimberley. So because it's monsoonal and it's a less developed region of Australia, there's no real roads, no sealed roads. So you have let's see if I've got my laser. Oh yeah. So you got Broome here, and you got a sealed road that sort of runs around these barrier ranges here. This is the King Leopold's somewhere here, and the Durack's there. So my understanding is once upon a time when Australia was north of the equator, some millions and a long time ago, it smashed into some other continent and then went down south, and this was the little souvenir from that encounter. And that's why you have these barrier ranges here, which actually affects the biogeography of the Kimberley region. So, yeah, getting back to the roads, so you've got a sealed road here that goes really around the Kimberley properly, the proper Kimberley, and that's it. So there's no sealed roads through any of this, which makes it a nice sort of special secret place almost. All right, so the environments of the Kimberley, this is just a snapshot. So most people, when they think of the Kimberley, they think of lovely waterfalls like this, and I might look at those and go, that's interesting, kind of. But I'll be more interested in this stuff here, or the rocky creeks, or maybe some pandanus swamps down the bottom. Or this is a lot more attractive than the waterfall for a frogger, because there'll be frogs in it. This is a sealed road. This is just outside of Kununurra, and a lot of the research I've done has been in ditches like this, because you can get to them. The frogs don't discriminate. They are happy to breed in there. And you can have places like this with a bit of sandstone. There's a lot of sandstone in the Kimberley. There'll be frogs all over this, and some nice boabs too. So I'll be touching on some of these environments as we go through the talk. All right, now first I'm going to start out with the hylids, because these are the things that if you go to the Kimberley, you're most likely to encounter. So they'll definitely be in your caravan park, and if it's the right time of year, they'll be making a bit of noise as well. We do have some sound. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but give it a try. That's the green tree frog there. It's supposed to sound like, people try to describe these where it's like barking dogs, troop of baboons or something. And even in the daytime, if they're not sort of doing that, you get a afternoon shower in the daytime, they'll give a little sort of group cheer, and they'll go, they're all around the house, they're all around us. So that's a green tree frog. It's a very chilled out frog. It's one of you can just, if you see one out at night, you can just pick it up, and they'll just, they might be a little concerned, but often they're just happy to sit on your hand. Very relaxed animals. Now, the laughing tree frog, let's have a listen to his laugh. Whoops. So it's kind of funny, but it's not that funny. It's more of a trill. The laughing frog name comes from more of the Queensland population, which turns out is the real laughing frog, and probably the top end Kimberley ones it's a new species we're working on. Not that different. So that guy is also, a climber. You'll find him around. These guys are also known for sunbaking a bit too, and I've seen them out in the sun, full, 40 plus degree sun. So they must be digesting or have some special abilities there, but they're not shy of sunbaking. Then you have a little red tree frog. So I kind of call this one the seagull frog. Sounds like a bunch of seagulls. This guy is all over Australia, but including the arid zone, Flinders, the eastern seaboard, and there's probably something like 5 or 6 species in it. That's another project on my to-do list. But it's the real Latoria rubella. Rubella meaning red. That's another common climbing guy. Let me just try to get this better. Here we go. All right, where am I? Oh yeah, too many buttons. Okay, now this guy is sort of the big brother of the more common green tree frog. So the green tree frog goes from Broome to about Sydney. It goes all through that sort of monsoonal tropics all the way down the eastern seaboard. This guy has the same distribution about as the boabs, so it's mostly the Kimberley with a bit of spillage into the NT. Now this guy, you'll see him a lot more around rocks than the green tree frogs, so you won't see this one in the middle of a forest. There's usually rocks associated with him, and he's got that sort of funky gland on his head. So that's a weird sort of, defense thing. All frogs are a little bit toxic, You don't stick your finger in your eye or your nose or your mouth after you handle one, because they all have a little bit of nasties on them, and this guy probably a little bit more than the tree dwellers. Now, I'll probably skip his call, although not too many people have heard it. Do you want to hear it? Where is he? Pretty hypnotic. There we are. Okay, now, just like the splendid or magnificent tree frog is a Kimberley endemic, this guy, the cave frog, Latoria cavernicola, he's up in that northwest corner. So this is something I'll come back to throughout the talk. But that northwest corner, you have a combination of the sandstone relief, so it's a lot more rugged, a lot more sort of fractured environment with a lot more rocks and hidey spots for frogs. And you're also getting a ton of rain as well, as much rain as we get down in winter in Perth, but dumping in January, March instead of July and August like down here. So that combination of rocks and rain, good for frogs. And it's really far away from people, so you need some special way to get there. So this guy here, he was just over here in these bushes. So again, the tourist eye is drawn to this, whereas the frogger ear is drawn to here, where he was calling. Now we have to do every one, right? It's a nice soft call. All right, pretty cool frog. Let him go on for a bit. Okay, so we're still with the green climbing frogs here, except these guys are really tiny. So this is the ones on the bottom are Latoria bicolor, because it's got kind of a two-tone paint job. Let's see what What's the name of that Latin instrument? Yep. So that's this guy. Whoop. He's still going. So these guys can be quite abundant where they occur, and you can see them in the day. They pose really well for photographs because they're sitting there on the leaf. You know, I'm a leaf, and you can get right up and photograph them, which is good. Now this little guy above, I lost my original picture, but this is a bit of a replacement. He's the javelin frog. Let's see if we can get him up. So these guys, there's only a few little ghettos in the Kimberley. If you go to the Northern Territory, there's a lot more of them. They seem to be more common. Because they're so tiny, they're really sort of sensitive to moisture conditions. So unless it's really raining or it has been raining that week, you don't really see them, you don't really hear them. And I've only seen them once in Drysdale. But they were talking about that big. It's one of the smallest Australian frogs. They do sort of sound like crickets. And I remember on one of the trips up north, me and Dale Roberts and Dave Pearson from DEPAW, we thought we heard some, and we were staring at this bush for about 5 minutes, and then Dale said, "They're crickets." And we all just coolly turned around, didn't say anything, and they're hard to hear. They're quite strange. But we were keen to see them. Okay, now these are the ground frogs. So we've come from the trees and the grass, and these are the super abundant guys you're likely to hear if you go out in the wet season. These are sort of what I call the flooded grassland species. They can be in massive abundance out there. So one of the common ones is the striped rocket frog on the lower left. These all have sort of a bunch of chucks and beaks. Yep, so he's pretty cool. He's a really good jumper, so he's got a little extra jumpy cartilage in his toes. And if you're driving along the road sort of looking for frogs, and you see a frog in the road that sort of jumps off the road in one jump, that's probably this guy, because he's a really excellent leaper. Now the other guys, you have a pale rocket frog above and then a bumpy rocket frog below. They're very similar, and let's just listen for the differences in the calls because it took us forever to figure this out. So you could hear it's sort of a constant beep with a little waver and then the sort of chucky things. So he doesn't have the beeps, he just has the waver. But because when you find these frogs, there's like in a pond, let's say the pond was the floor here, you're talking like 100 frogs or more, and they're all making a big noise, and it's actually hard to get a recording and look at the frog, because when you do a recording, you actually have to look at the frog to make sure it's moving its throat, because if you record something and then catch the wrong one, then you've just gone backwards. So it takes a long time to figure these things out. But yeah, there's your ground frogs, and the genus Latoria is an absolutely massive genus, and one day it'll be broken up, and when it's broken up, these will be the Latorias, and everything else will have a different name. It's one of those too hard basket problems for taxonomists. It's way too hard for me. Someone else is going to do it. All right, so now this is a story of how we got something new. So this is Butch Marr's helicopter, which is often our taxi up in the wet season when we go up looking for frogs. The code name for this guy was the sinkhole frog because we were up in the Prince Regent. This is a giant sinkhole that he's landed on the edge of. And this was a survey sort of it was only a few years ago, and it was almost a mopping up survey. It's like, well, we've got a few new species. We've figured it out. There's nothing more to discover. Then we heard this sound. So because I hadn't been to the Kimberley in about a year since we heard the sound, at first I thought it was a new species, and then I thought it wasn't. So we grabbed a few individuals, as you do, made some recordings, and when I got back to the base, I was convinced it was not a new species. I thought it was this guy, which is Latoria tornieri, which is a well-known frog, the black-shinned rocket frog. Okay, now there's the differences in the pulses. So you can see this is the sinkhole guy, and this is tornieri, and you can see these hardwired, evolved differences in the calls. This is what I thought I was hearing. So I guess the point is that frog calls can be really hard to figure out, and it's a bit strange, these two species, because the tornieri, well, what happened is during the trip someone brought some real tornieris back, and it's like, whoa, these are a bit bigger. They're from a grassland area. They're not in rocks. And then we looked at them and went, oh yeah, it is a new species. I'm still waiting for the day where I see an animal and it's like, yes, it's a new species. Usually it's kind of a surreal thing because it doesn't fit and you want it to fit. So the thing I usually say about discovering a new species, it's kind of like, it's kind of almost weird, but it's kind of like when you've been burgled or something, your car or your house, and you go back to your car or your house and you're trying to make sense of what's going on, and then after a while it's like, someone's come in. That's why the door is broken or something. But there's that sort of time when when it's kind of surreal and you're trying to, because it's a new species, it's not on the map. Anyway, Eureka, it was. Okay, now this guy here, so that was an example of, the new species is a little bit kind of son of the black-shinned rocket frog. They're closely related, and you can see how one went from a grassland to a rocky area. So this guy here is sort of in between the grassland frog and the rock frogs, which we're going to get to in a second, because he's got slightly expanded toe pads. And these guys like sort of rocks, but sometimes they're in grasslands, so they're kind of in between. But this species is doing a few weird things. So this is a male here, which is, the males tend to be kind of small, and the females can be quite massive. So the females can be over 70 mils big, and the males are typically like 35, maybe up to 40. So if you see them mating, you see this little male getting a piggyback from this big female. Now I call them the late night party frog because it took a while to figure this out working up there, but these guys really only kick off late at night, and they go till dawn. So if you went to bed every night at 11, you wouldn't hear very many of these. So it was only a few nights sort of staying out and being in a situation where it's like, these frogs are going crazy. And it has a good, interesting call. That's one of my favorite calls. It's pretty wild. So a lot of these recordings we use for research, or we try to isolate the individual. So that was the case. The males in these choruses, they're just jumping everywhere. So I got that recording when one happened to jump where I already had a microphone and got that nice clean recording. So what happens when they so they do that sort of chicken thing, then they go do the da 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 da, and then all the males will go da 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 da, and then one will break through and go da 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 da, and then they'll all go da 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 da. So I have no idea what's going on. Must be some macho stuff going on there, but maybe it's a good project for someone to figure it out. Okay, so here's the rock frogs, and yep, they hang around rocky creeks. So here's your most common one, Latoria coplandi. You can see this guy in the dry season too, if you're lucky and looking around creeks, turning some rocks, that you might see them. Let's see what he sounds like. Steady. So these guys don't tend to form dense choruses like some other frogs. You just get the lone operator on his rock, and they're all spread around, trying to attract females that way. So so this is the common one. You can see the expanded toe pads. This is the rockhole frog, which I'll get to in a second, and this was a new one I'll get to now. So when we first started this project with the help of Alcoa, who funded a lot of the Kimberley research in the early days, and helped get the website off the ground and things like that. So I was based in Kununurra, just here, and we discovered this species just down the road near Wyndham. So if you go to Kununurra or Wyndham, the grotto is a nice swimming hole. It's featured in these new WA tourism ads with a couple swimming underwater and stuff. But it had a new species of frog just in 2006 when we went there. So I was with Marian Ansis, the tadpole lady. We were getting tadpoles at the base of this rock, base of this ridge, and we heard this strange call. We checked it out, and then it was another sort of surreal moment, because it wasn't a eureka moment, because we thought that call was different, but no one had a call of the common rock frog. I mean, this is the problem with working in these new areas. It's like, okay, the common rock frog. You'd think someone would have a recording of it or know what it sounds like. No, there was nothing. So we had to figure that out, and then after about a week or so of arguing in the car and looking at stuff, it's like, then we had the eureka. So that's this guy here, the chattering rock frog. I mean, you can start to hear similar elements between a few of these things. Yeah, so often with these calls, people have found that some part of the call is for the other rivals, and one part of the call is for the ladies. And so researchers, behaviorists will get speakers and play just one part of it and see see how that affects the behavior of males and females, and go from there. But no one's sort of done those experiments to break up what these signals mean yet. Yep, so that's our guy, and because I was working with Marian, who's bananas about tadpoles, she likes to document every little thing about tadpoles and raise them up and take a million pictures of them, and she was looking at these and going, oh my God, they're totally different. And I said, sure, I'm glad you're on my team. Okay, and they grow up to cute little baby frogs, cute frog shot. All right, so this is the rockhole frog. So this guy you'll also encounter if you're going for a swim up in a rock hole or hanging around the grotto. These are known for, their skipping ability. So if the purple is the water and the wood is the rock, and if I come up to one, then they'll like skip across the water and then come back, and then I can chase it, and then it'll skip again or go across the creek. So it's that thing where they have a good jumping ability, and they're so small they can actually make it across the water. So that common rock frog also can skip for a little while, but then it sinks. So when I started observing that, I thought about if you guys you probably heard of the basilisk lizard or Jesus Christ lizard, the one that walks on water. Well, the little secret there is that the little ones can walk on water, but the big ones sink because they're too big. So maybe those same sort of principles are at work in these guys. So I wonder what he sounds like. Okay, it goes on for a while. We'll just move along. So we found a new rockhole frog, or actually it was Russell and Matt Barrett, two really great botanists that grew up in the Kimberley, and they're doing great stuff in Perth, really know their plants, but they're also well-rounded naturalists that know all sorts of things. And they saw these tadpoles up in the Prince Regent a few years ago, and they just, thought, well, this isn't in any books. No one's ever heard of these tadpoles. They couldn't find any information. So then began this search for what this thing was and what it turned into, because no one really knew what it turned into. Could turn into a giant, 3-headed frog or something. But it turned out to be this guy. It was a rockhole frog. This one here. So the adults don't look that different. They're a little bit redder. They have a few more speckles. The call is a bit different. Where is it? So see if you can remember the other one, and then this one. So it's pretty much the same, but they added that little screech thing was added. And of course the tadpoles are different. And the genetics had some support as well. So there you go. Starts out this goldy color. Maybe it's camouflage for the streams they're in, the sandstone platforms. And then they turn into these guys. All right, now that was all the frogs I've talked about so far are the tree frogs, the hylids, climbing frogs. They're descended from a Southeast Asian group when Australia ran into Southeast Asia 20 plus million years ago. These guys are also tree frogs, but they are completely underground, and there's a few species in the Kimberley. So this is your big giant frog at about 10 or 11 centimeters. Not subtle frogs. So this guy is one of the first to breed when the wet season starts. So they'll be out honking, whatever they're doing, and their tadpoles get in first. And the whole strategy with what this frog's trying to do is to eat other frogs and be the biggest frog around so that you can eat more frogs. So the tadpoles have rapid growth. They're these big schools of tadpoles you see early in the wet season. And then the metamorphs start to come out, and then they don't wander away from the pond very far because there's all this food that's going to start coming out of the pond. And so these guys are just champion frog eaters. Different species, same species, brother, sister, nothing personal, but you're going to get eaten. I had the experience, there's a little ghetto of these in the Pilbara, and I was on the Pilbara survey, and I made the mistake of putting a frog about this big in with a frog about that big, and then I got back to base, and there was one frog in the bag. I thought, oh, maybe there's a hole in it. No, so sometimes when you're around ponds, you'll hear frogs scream, because frogs do this sort of unnerving sort of scream sound. And if you go investigate, often it's one of these giant frogs clamped onto the leg of another frog. And like that size difference is I'm not kidding about that. And they'll just take their time and get that frog in there somehow, and they're just really good at it. But it's that whole sort of trick about getting out there first in the season, then they have that advantage right through the wet season. Okay, here's our long-footed frog. So this guy you'll see also jumping on frogs around ponds. And like the Australis, he dribbles down to the arid zone a little bit, but not the Pilbara, more a bit down the Canning Stock route. There's some records. Still relying on the monsoonal rains, both of these species. And if you go to a chorus when these guys are really going off, it just sounds really weird. And you can't even think. It's just so loud. And you start to go mad after a little while, just listening to all that. Now, there's also this hidden species amongst us, we think now, which is this guy, the Daly Waters frog, Daly Waters Northern Territory. And so we keep finding these guys in low frequency, and if that guy's a then this guy's a but it's a little bit different colored, but there's a lot of overlap. But this guy probably goes all the way to about Derby. We found him. So again, that's on my to-do list. Watch this space in a few years. Okay, some wailing. May not be Bob Marley. They're kind of similar. These guys, I haven't seen very many of them. I just got a call only a mother could love if it's a wailing. This is it's a little bit more primitive, this guy. Sort of looks primitive. He's got this hidden eardrum, the skin's sort of grown over it. And he's a nice, cute, small one. And this was a night where this is what happens with a lot of these sort of frogs. You won't see very many of them. And I remember this night there was sort of, a bit of a build-up, and then it had a big dump, and then those are all that species, Cyclorana cryptotis. You can see them all in the background. Everyone was getting lucky. It was all happening. There was a few the next night, and then nothing. And then just a few individuals for the rest of the wet season. So this is what they call in frog world explosive breeders. And that's a lot of these subterranean guys that come out of the ground, just have a night of making hay, and then back in the ground or wherever they go, as opposed to the more prolonged ones, which we'll get to. All right, so that was the tree frogs, the family Hylidae, and now we're going to shift into some Gondwanan frogs. So now, none of these are in the Kimberley. They're all in the southwest, so you won't see these up in the Kimberley. So that's our heliop here. So they're only in 5 species in Perth and 1 over near Sydney. These are more desert guys, Neobatrachus, and that's your sort of classic banjo frog from Limno Dynasties. but there's a few weird species, different kind of species in the Kimberley. So when I say these are Gondwanan, nearest relatives are from South America. So when South America and Antarctica and Australia were all connected, so we're talking, well, as a colleague says, they were in Australia before Australia was Australia, the original Australias. Okay. So he's a bit honky. Now this is as opposed to that explosive breeder I showed you before. This guy, you'll hear these guys in a swamp through dry times. Just one male honking in his swamp, night in, night out. So they're sort of reliable that way. Never very dense, but steady. And this guy is definitely a swamp dweller. So he's in sort of boggy, marshy areas. Okay, now this is the flat-headed frog. There's a bit of controversy with this one. Let's get his call up here. So this was, now when they created Lake Argyle, which you could actually see from space in that first satellite shot, there was a sort of this whole area is going to be flooded, everything's going to die, so museum and Harry Butler and a few people went around and grabbed a whole bunch of specimens, and then sorting through that, one of these showed up. So then it was described as a new species, but of course the original place where it was from was destroyed. So people thought it might have been extinct. Then people thought it was Limnodonastes tasmaniensis, and that's the very common one down south, all through Adelaide and Melbourne, that area. And there was this sort of tall tale that, there was construction up in, Kununurra, and they came up in the demountable buildings, and so it was tasmaniensis. But it turned out that the species wasn't extinct. It goes well into the Bradshaw country in the Northern Territory, and it's not such a mystery anymore. But it's a nice frog. And this is a male here. You can tell with a male because in some of these frog species, the males have these sort of giant Popeye arms, which might mean multiple mating or something like that. Just throw that out there. All right, woodworker. So these guys are busy toiling away. Again, they're sort of a steady caller. These are definitely Rocky Creek guys. So because it was such an unusual habitat, the original describers called it Megastolotus, otis meaning the ear, because it has this massive eardrum, almost as big as the eye. But no, it's just a Limnodonastes that has wandered into the rocks and speciated somehow. So there's all these fragmented populations of these guys in the Kimberley, and they spill out into the top end as well. One of my favorites. Okay, now these are the notodens. So there's only 4 of these species all through Australia, and 2 make it to the Kimberley. Now, I'll say they're a bit oozy, because if you pick them up or start to mess with them, they start oozing this sort of yellowy, whitish sort of goo from the back, which means don't touch, don't put it in your mouth, and you back off. Okay, so there's this guy here. So this is, he goes from the Kimberley across the top end, so he's sort of all throughout the monsoonal tropics. So these calls, like even on the last trip, there was some new people, and I had to even take my own advice because I was hoping to get this species and the next species together because it hadn't been documented. And so I heard a chorus, what I thought was a chorus of these, and I've done this before. It's like I can hear the chorus. It can't be that far, and you'll walk for kilometers and kilometers, and it just sounds like the same distance. So I've learned my lesson not to follow these choruses, so not for too long. But there's something about that sound that just carries. And when you do find them, they can be in quite big numbers. But they're pretty shy frogs. Very cute. All right, now this is the special Northwest version of the Notodden, which is the most handsome, very nice colors. These guys are a lot more rocky. So the other Notoddens are burrowers in the deserts, or like the last one, all across the monsoonal tropics. These guys like rocks for some reason. So it's one of those things where, for some reason, evolution's just created this thing. And I swear I've seen boulders, big car-sized boulders with like this globular frog sitting on top of it. And they have proportionally longer legs, so there's something about the rocks that these guys really like. This is a bit of that defensive posture. So these guys are really sensitive. I might as well give you the call while we're talking. By the way, this is the first time this call has ever been recorded, so very few people in the world have heard this. A little bit similar to the other ones. So these guys, I've always thought there was like a chorus, maybe, but me and Claire Stevenson used to work here. We were wandering around these outcrops, and there seemed to be just scattered individuals. So very different breeding system, perhaps. We just have these sort of lone wolves out there doing a call, hoping to attract a female. Maybe it has to do something with the swamp versus rock habitat driving this. But these are more sort of questions. But I'll get back to this guy. So you don't even have to touch these things before they stick their head down like that. Because if you put a torch on them at night, they'll just be really sensitive. And then you can just like touch them with a feather, and then they'll make this like whoop, whoop, whoop. It's a really weird sound, but it makes you go, ah. And then they, like turtles and blue tongues and thorny devils, they do that thing where if you come at them like this, they'll go like that. And if you come out that way, they'll go like that, sort of presenting to you the back, which is full. If you start to get them excited, it'll be full of this sort of custardy goo on the back. And I remember I was photographing one time, and I was trying to get him in a good position, and he wasn't liking it. And then I was reaching my hand towards him, and he actually leapt towards me and gooed me. So that's like the first time I've ever been attacked by a frog. It engaged me. I left it alone. Okay, now these guys used to be in Limno dynasties, but these are actually related to a thing called Lecriotis, which has these New Guinea connections. So they go a bit back, and they come in these 3 different morphs. So you got your racing stripe morph, your ornate morph, and then your sort of plain morph as well. It's all all the same species, just like eye color or something. A very distinctive call. So these guys have a weird strategy in that your giant frog eats the baby frogs coming out of the pond, where these tadpoles have a bit of extra equipment to eat tadpoles in the pond, and that's sort of what they do. So we're just starting to learn about some of these habits of these animals. So that's their cool thing. All right, so that was the Limnodinacidae, are the big Gondwanan frogs, and now we have the small Gondwanan frogs, the Myobatrachidae. So none of these are in the Kimberley. So these are our southern frogs here in 3 different genera. And you might hear it here first, but I know people wanting to put these all into the single genus because they're actually not that differently related. This guy, Spicuspina, his nearest relative, which is a long time ago, is Euparelia, which is a Kimberley frog, which we'll be getting to in a sec. We have a few crinias in the Kimberley. They're small and they're on the wetter edges, and then these guys aren't represented at all. All right, so this was we found a new crinia up in the Kimberley. So the normal crinia is this guy, which is basically everywhere. So the bilingua means 2 voice. You can hear 2 calls. Yeah, so these guys can be in quite big numbers. They're in grass tussocks. They're invisible. They're like small little guys that are very shy. So they're really hard to catch and can be in massive numbers. And this is one that you'll hear on films in the background that are shot up north. You'll hear this frog sort of cricking in the background. I think I heard some in Charlie's Country, I saw the other day. But this guy here, we were up at Mitchell Plateau, and this was Luke Price, an ex-student of some in Adelaide of some people, and he was very enthusiastic, and he really discovered it. And then he saw a few of these sort of frogs, and he was like, "Hey, Paul, this must be a new species," and it's like, "Nah, it's a baby one of these," or it's just, it was late at night or something. And then the next morning it was like, the kid's onto something. Could be a new one. So it's a very distinctive species. It's got these flanges on the fingers, which is what the name means, fimbriata. And we have no idea what the flanges are for in the males. Sometimes the banjo frogs have flanges on the female's fingers because they make a bubble nest. They slap the water with an extra flange, make a bubble. But so far we've only found these flanges in the few specimens we've encountered on the males. But I like mysteries like that. Like, it must be for something. So we just have to encounter more frogs. Now this is a sort of species that people like me lose a bit of sleep over because I don't know what it sounds like. I've never heard the call. When these pictures were taken, the next night, somebody on our team found these frogs, took the pictures, and said, "I got to go here and try to get my recording." And I sat there for like an hour with these frogs by this pool, nothing. And then, we had to go eventually. So it bugs me. I don't know what it sounds like. So you can't hear it either. I'll get back up there, I promise. This guy, so if you look at the Crinia family tree, it's a bit weird. Because basically the earliest branch are 2 species in Tasmania. Next off the branch is this one. And then the other ones are just the common ones like we have in the southwest, Crinia signifera over in the east, those sort of species. So this is like a really strange relic that's been hanging out in the Kimberley for millions and millions of years, and it's only in that northwest rocky corner. Okay, so it's species like these, which are really quite exciting. And it's beautiful. It's a nice species. Okay, now the Euparelias, always left for last. These guys are called toadlets because they resemble toads, and they're brown, a bit rough skin, sort of cryptic habits. And the Kimberley is like the epicenter of diversity. So there's something like a dozen species in the Kimberley, and there's about 24 species across Australia. But Kimberley's where it's at if you're a connoisseur of these guys. And they drive most froggers absolutely mad. And some people would just say, someone else's problem, you deal with them. So they come in two sort of flavors, the clickers and the squelchers. So that's that guy there. The guy on the right. Here are a few other frogs in the back. So that's the clickers. They all sort of kind of sound like that. That's a squelch. So you got to be really into these frogs to figure them out. And they do have these little, like with a lot of sort of things that don't move too fast, they have a bit of flash coloration or warning coloration in the legs. I don't know. It's a nice species ID tool. I'm not sure if it's going to scare any sort of predators necessarily, but a lot of them do have it. I just thought I'd throw this guy in there because they're sort of like, a dirt clod or something, and they're really cryptic, really hard to see, and they just sort of fly under the radar. But they can be super abundant where they occur, these little guys. All right, now we did get a new one of these species a few years ago. So there he goes. Here's Butch in his trusty Robinson 44, and Butch is a Kimberley guy. He lives in Derby now, which is the biggest town he's ever lived in. And sometimes he says feels like the walls are closing in. There's like too many people. So this was we did a lot of this research at this place called Baxton Creek Camp, which is a bird watching fishing camp just outside the Prince Regent National Park. So Butch always sleeps in his tent, even in the wet season. And this little bit of rock was just behind Butch's tent. So he was trying to sleep, but we were being discourteous to our helicopter pilot and making all this noise because we heard this funny call. I don't have the call with me, but it turned out to be this new species. And here's the records here, right up there. That's that straight line you always see on the maps. That's the Prince Regent River itself. Whoops. But there it is. It sort of goes right. I called it a rasp, sort of like rubbing your finger on a comb or something. So it has a distinctive call, and it is really tiny. It's a little 2-centimeter guy, very cute. And it's a little bit primitive too. It has a little bit of funky tubercles, a little spotting on his face, so it's a nice little attractive one. The closest relative is this one just outside of Darwin. So again, it's a northwest rocky only species. So you get that feeling that the northwest, where the rocks are, it cuts species off from the rest of the sandstone areas in Arnhem Land. Oh yes, and one more species. So this was formerly Trachoderma. So this just came out a few months ago. So Trachoderma was supposed to be around Connemara and then extend into the top end. So a few years ago we found them around Fitzroy Crossing, and I was like, what are these? I'd never seen these before. So it turned out all the ones in Connemara weren't Trachoderma. The old records, because we never really found them, turned out to be other species. And this guy turned out to be a new kind of species. So he's in the clicker camp, but you can see he's added a few pulses, so it's starting to be a mini rasp, if that makes sense. Okay, I'll leave you with that. So I'd just like to thank all the photographers, including Brad and Marion. This is Marion Ansis here. Tadpole Lady. This is Scotty from one of our trips last year, cool Aboriginal kid from Clumbaroo. That's Claire, it used to be from the museum, and Mitzi, when we got that sinkhole, she was there to discover that too. Alcoa's sponsored us for a long time and other projects at the museum as well, including the education team. As Philena mentioned, Department of Parks and Wildlife, or CALM, or DC. Often I work with those guys. It's really good to get out together. And lots of helpers throughout the years, too. I like a bit of, usually on the trips, I try to mix it up with a bit of youth, a bit of wisdom, i.e. old people, and, mix it up a bit so you get different teams and different experience, and everyone's worked really hard on the trips to get the pictures and make the discoveries. So thanks to all those people. The end.